But a child is a child, no matter what.
That I should be able to play in my room again, dream of being a superhero.
Have my mom put me to bed. I believe you do. You see that I should be with my family, that I just want a hug.
I believe you see sons,
Daughters, brothers and sisters.
and I believe that you know I am like
Any
other
child.
So, just a short video that already like tells us that children sometimes just need simple things like a hug or having their mom when they go to bed. But there's much more that children are subject to when they are like on the move or migrant children. So all over, to give you some insight into the numbers, all over there are about 60 million children that left their home country, and out of which every second is a refugee child. So all the others are migrant children that sometimes suffer of the same things, but not of all of it. So these 28 million children have been uprooted because they have been living in conflict zones. They have been affected by war. Yeah, so this is a huge number, and it has increased since 2010. So from 2010 to 2015, it has increased or jumped up by 75%, which is like a huge increase. And it's no coincidence that in the same time period, the world saw 15 conflicts either being breaking out again or reignited. Yeah, so from the Syrian Arab Republic, which everybody knows it's in its the war is in its 7th year now. Conflicts in South Sudan, in Yemen and Afghanistan, and many more conflicts all around the world. So nearly 1 in every 3 children living outside their country of birth is a refugee. And this proportion is much more concentrated than among adults. Yeah? So only 1 in every 20 adults is a refugee, yeah, when they live outside their country of birth, but 1 in 3 children. And every second 100 child in the world is a refugee. Yeah? Also a huge number. And not every child has a chance to leave the area of conflict, has a chance to leave the crisis zone. So still, worldwide, 1 in 9 children live in an area of conflict and are subject to even more severe violations to their rights. So among these refugees, girls and boys are equally represented. So there's no gender-based numbers, but the risks that childs are subject to might differ among girls and boys, and I will come to that later. Yeah, but the numbers are kind of the same. So just to remind you of some recent conflicts. So since August, the conflict in Myanmar has been very severe, and in Bangladesh there are now about more than 700,000 Rohingya refugee children that suffer from dirty water, malnutrition. Only 3% of those 720 have been immunized against measles and polio. And they also don't have the access to education. Yeah, it's not only the basic things, but also education and traumatic experiences make their lives hard. I already mentioned Syria. Syria is in its 7th year of war, and the neighboring countries, the neighboring countries have accepted a lot of refugees from that area. And we should not forget about the conflict in Ukraine, where many children go to school in the basements of like buildings, but while they hear bombs detonating. But there's also other reasons why children and families are on the move. It's also the climate change and consequences like famine in Yemen, South Sudan, or Nigeria, or natural disasters. Yeah, like the hurricane Irma or the earthquakes in Mexico recently. So UNICEF is present in all of those regions and cares for the children. But still, those who are in the conflict areas, who are on the move, but even those who arrived at their final destinations are subject to risks. So these children often travel in desperate circumstances, so the lack of adequate nutrition, adequate food, clean water is always a problem to get it. They have no clothing, so now winter starts, and also the children that left their homes need proper clothes. The children need temporary shelter, medical care, education, and psychosocial care. So the latter two are maybe the most long-term consequences. If you, for sure, you first have to care for the children that they have proper food, water, clothing, etc. But then in the second step, you have to make sure that this period when they are in a refugee camp is not a lost period. Yeah. So a child has the right to be educated, the right to have a healthy social development, and also to play and to really be a child and to have a childhood. But there's other risks when those children are on the move. So there's extreme violence that they not only experience, but sometimes they're the subject of the violence. Some children either might lose their parents, or they had to be separated. They had to go on their own way because the family took this decision. Either at home or on the move, they might get injured, they might be kidnapped, they might be abused, or there might be gender-specific sexual violence that affects both girls and boys. There's also other risks like child labor. So this is very popular among refugee children as well. So, for example, one of my colleagues went to Jordan about 1 year ago, and they went to refugee camps. And the refugee children that went to the children's centers, they were also working during the day, and also in order to get some income for their families. Yeah, they were doing just simple things, but UNICEF tries to convince parents, governments, communities to find a balance, that the children not only go to work, but also make up for some education. Yeah. So in this camp where my colleague went to, they had like a shift plan in the schools. So in the morning, the one group was having like lessons, and most of them would then go for work in the afternoon, and then there was an afternoon shift. Yeah. So, but this is very important, that first of all, it should not be an extreme child labor, so not like child labor which is like dangerous for the children. This is not allowed, and the children must have the possibility to go to school, and to get some education. Yeah. Then another issue that increased in recent years was also child marriage. So a lot of more girls have been married from those conflict areas, because for families it sometimes was a wish to send their children to Europe, for example, or they were poor and could not pay for everything on their own. So then marrying or getting one of their children married was one possibility to solve this issue. Yeah. You might have heard that in the German media about 1 year ago, or last summer, like in 2016, there was a huge discussion about what the German communities should do with foreign marriages. So what happens if a refugee comes in and they have been married as children and they are still children? What should authorities do then? And back then they accepted a huge bunch of child marriages as long as they were like married above the age of 14. But in this summer, Germany took the decision that child marriages below the age of 18 are not anymore allowed and not accepted anymore. Yeah. So this was a change in the law. Another issue is that refugee children are at risk to be recruited by armed forces, and also in Syria and around there was an increase in recruitment of child soldiers in that period. So all these issues affect the basic children's rights to a healthy life, to a childhood, to a healthy social development. And those are some of the risks that children on the move, that refugee children are subject to. So what UNICEF does, they run around 250 programs each year in about 90 countries, those emergency relief programs. And so the first issue, what has to be done is to supply people, so both families and children, with clean water, then to supply psychosocial support, and this is done in child-friendly spaces where children and also their parents can go, and children can just play and enjoy their childhood, at least for like some hours during a day. Then there's education, so UNICEF builds a lot on education, both in the refugee camps, where it's like extra school tents, but also in emergency schools in conflict areas. Yeah, so UNICEF would supply those emergency schools and also the schools in refugee camps with material, and would train those teachers. Yeah. And then also, like in Bangladesh, this is now one of the most important, and also in the famine crisis, to treat the malnutrition. And this is especially important for those children under the age of 5, yeah, because they are most vulnerable to malnutrition. So this is one picture of a child-friendly space where children can get psychosocial support, so in order to cope with their traumatic experiences. So the people that work, the UNICEF people that work in those child-friendly spaces, are trained on how to support the children. Then they have learning games as means for education. So the problem is that sometimes the children, so first of all, there are often not enough teachers, and if the children went through traumatic experiences, it also might be hard to just sit there for like 6 hours. So learning games is a good means to start. Yeah. And those places were also installed in Germany. So in Germany there are now about 75 of those spaces in different refugee camps, since UNICEF was advising the German government in how to supply refugee children with the best possible. So this is a picture that one of my colleagues gave to me when she was in Jordan. So this is one of the refugee camps. This is Zaatari, and yeah, UNICEF is often like in charge of supplying with clean water in refugee camps, but not only like here, but also in conflict areas. So, for example, UNICEF runs a huge water program in Aleppo. Yeah, so kind of UNICEF is a water expert. This is a school in a refugee camp, but as I said, there's also emergency schools in conflict areas, and UNICEF supplies with material. For example, they have a school in a box. And this is just a picture that also one of my colleagues took when she was in Jordan. To tell your heart every morning you deserve to be happy. Yeah, this is important for children to be happy. And here's also like some pictures she took on the streets. So stay in school because this is important. So UNICEF has an agenda for action and calls for a 6-point plan to keep refugee children and migrant children safe. So I will just do it shortly because I have to end my talk. So children have to be protected, and they have to be actions to support these protections. Separated and unaccompanied children have to be should not be detented. They should live in a foster family or in community-based surroundings. This is not too much of an issue in Germany. Like unaccompanied children in Germany, there's an extra office and only in charge for them. But in other countries, it's still an issue. Families have to be kept together because children that are unaccompanied are far more at risk to those violations than children in their family. Children need to have access to education and to medical care. And we also should think of the causes. Yeah, we have to press for action on the causes that uproot children from their homes. And then the last one is that we should combat xenophobia and discrimination. And this is maybe the thing that all of us could support. Yeah, this can be done by non-governmental organizations, can be done by the media, it can be done by us. It's in our responsibility to increase the understanding between refugees, their families, the society, and so on. And here's just once more back to UNICEF in general. So UNICEF, why is UNICEF? UNICEF is all over the world, and they have 70 years of experience. That's why the German government asked for their advice. They are present in nearly 150 countries around the world. That's why they can act very promptly as soon as there is an emergency. And they can help on a large scale, together with a lot of partners all around the world. And this is the UNICEF greeting card. So yesterday, some of my colleagues were here, and you had the possibility to buy UNICEF greeting cards. And this is the first greeting card ever that UNICEF sold. This card was painted by a child from the Czech Republic in '49. Yeah. So because she wanted to thank UNICEF for what UNICEF did for her and for her family and friends. And this was the start of a huge story, because we still sell those Christmas cards as a funding for the programs all around the world. So remember, a child is a child, and yeah, I think now I can accept some further questions if you have.
Well, thank you very much on behalf of everyone at the ICU for volunteering your time to come in to talk about your initiative. So we're going to take a few questions from the audience. So if there are any questions, you can put up your hand. Okay, in the back. So we'll go here, and then we'll go on the right hand side. So your name and your country.
My name is Roger, I'm from France. I would like to ask a question about what UNICEF is doing to UN then. What about the free thing? There is a need, and it's concerned that our government doesn't want the help because of the UN made the UN impact as on how do you deal with it?
As UNICEF?
Yeah. I mean, yeah, UNICEF.
So UNICEF has one of the highest priorities is a child. That's why UNICEF is always neutral in politics. Yeah. So I think this year is the first time that we really offensively claim for peace, but still we would never stand on one or the other side because it's not the children that are responsible for this conflict. For example, so once I heard a presentation by one UNICEF staff in Syria, and he was talking about the education system in Syria and how they supply, and they managed to cooperate with both sides. Yeah. So the UNICEF material then in the one region had the one logo, and in the other region it had the other logo. But in the end, it doesn't matter for the children, because the children have to have access to those material, to education. So UNICEF is neutral, politically neutral, but always the first priority is the best interest of the child. But still, UNICEF also talks to governments. Yeah. So there are UNICEF diplomats that go to the governments and try to convince and try to convince them on programs they should do. And I think since they are so neutral, it's much easier for them. Yeah. I hope this satisfies your question.
Our next question on the right hand side. Stand up. Please stand.
I'm Mariana. My question is related to what change that happened in Germany about the child marriage. Do you see that their marriage announced? Are they sent to how do they have? Can they talk to their parents? Are they allowed to talk to their parents, or because their parents are the ones that allow them to get married in the first place, they don't have access to them anymore? What's the...
No, they have the possibility to contact their parents and to talk to them. It's also not, although this is not allowed in Germany to be married as a child, the parents didn't do this because they wanted to break law or so. Yeah, they were also kind of making this decision out of lack of alternatives, or poverty or so on. Yeah. So what happens to those children, to answer your first question, when they come to Germany and then the marriage is not registered here, then they will be treated like unaccompanied children. So they will come to homes, but all those children have the possibility to contact their parents. Yeah.
There's 2 more questions. We'll go here first.
Thank you. My name is Bridget Enyihara from Nigeria. The president of this event, this conference. My question is in the area. Now I appreciate all the talks you've given concerning the children and how it is the priority of UNICEF. But my question is, in developing countries, let me say precisely like Nigeria, we have this problem of children not attending school, children who are displaced in different areas where there have been conflict at one time or the other. And some individuals take it upon themselves, to fund the education. There are some of these children who are helpless, the parents cannot help them, and sponsor them, put them in schools and pay their school fees, pay the teachers to teach them, provide school uniform, school bags, make them comfortable as if their parents can afford. Okay? For individuals who have been doing such things, and at the point we discover that they would need extra help to keep pushing this project, or let me say, the program. How can UNICEF come in? Is there any way UNICEF can help to make that program more realistic or expand it to accommodate more children from different areas also who are affected in that manner?
So there is a country office in Nigeria,
Yes.
and as far as I know, UNICEF in Nigeria is working together with local partners. So UNICEF would never do those things on their own. There's always like an international expert from other regions coming there and advising those projects, but it's done with other partnerships. And your question is how UNICEF can support such a actually, I don't know how the process works, whether it's only on the that UNICEF first finds out about some projects and then adds on, or whether the partner would come to UNICEF and ask for help. I actually cannot give you a satisfying answer on that. But I can, after the talk, I can tell you some websites and contacts that might help in that perspective. Okay.
We're just going to move on to final question. Stand up, say your name and your country.
Hello, my name is Rashid, and I'm from India. So, in India, we have this working with refugee camp and actually opportunity to visit. As part of India. So, we concentrate more on the education of children. We have like a particular So, one of the things that we noticed was since these children, they had a hard time coming from Bangladesh, they first went to Bangladesh and then So it lost almost like 2 years. It took almost 2 years for them to arrive over there. Now they are studying in a government school, but one of the examples would be like how you happen to be a child who was 18 years old and studying in class 6 or 7. They've missed like 3 years or 4 years of study.
Yeah.
So how do we balance this? We have to think about that. And the authority who is responsible for India in India is like highest cost UNICEF. So is UNICEF actually doing a program to bring speed track programs to bring students to the active track that they're supposed to study, or do we have this program in Berlin? In Berlin, we have like the maximum number of refugees under the age of 18 in Syria. So, with regard to that, we have some programs to help other NGOs.
To help other NGOs?
This particular program like students who are much older studying.
Yeah. It's if a child is on the move and for such a long time, then you miss out a lot of education, yeah, and you have to make up for this, at least for to some extent. Probably you can never make up for it. Like it takes a lot of time to make up for it completely compared to a child that has always been always gone to school. But one thing that UNICEF does, so what is important is that they have the the primary school education. This is what they insist on. So like the upper class education is not too much in the focus of UNICEF. This is done by partners then. So UNICEF is more an expert on the primary school education because this is also like, it's the important basis for everything else. I want to say, so, and I'm not aware of like a distinct program like putting together like refugee children. I think this always depends on the country. Yeah, there's no like all-time recipe for it because it depends on the country. It depends on the background of the children. It depends on what they have gone through. Yeah, so those children have gone through traumatic experiences. What is the point? When can you send them like to a normal surrounding, like with a teacher that is maybe not specialized on those experiences? Yeah, this is important. So I think there's no general answer I can give because it's so individual. Yeah. And it depends on the school system in that country. Every school system is somehow different, and also on the society and the culture, like how they engage. Yeah. So if like the parents of those school children that had their children all over in school are against it. Then there's a different issue, yeah, a different problem that has to be discussed by teachers, parents, and the society. Yeah, so it's much more complicated, I think. So, yeah.
Okay, let's take our speaker one.